Amara Simmons had been preparing for this day for weeks. As the daughter of a respected local entrepreneur and philanthropist, she'd long been taught the importance of responsibility and standing firm in her values. At 16, she had just received a prestigious $10,000 scholarship for her academic excellence, a reward she earned through countless hours of hard work. Today, she was taking her scholarship check to the Hancock Trust Bank for the very first time, an act that felt both empowering and nerve-wracking. Amara's father, Charles Simmons, had built his fortune from the ground up. As a successful tech entrepreneur, Charles never flaunted his wealth. His was a story of resilience, and his wealth was a testament to his philosophy: power lies in lifting others, not hoarding it. Amara had inherited her father's values. While her family was comfortably wealthy, Amara wore the simplest school uniform, preferring practicality over opulence. As Amara walked into the grandiose Hancock Trust Bank, she was struck by the lavish surroundings. The polished marble floors, high-vaulted ceilings, and luxurious chandeliers practically screamed old money and exclusivity. This was a place where only the wealthiest felt at home, where tailored suits and high-end watches were the standard. The air was thick with an unspoken sense of superiority that Amara could already feel, but she pushed those thoughts aside. She wasn't here to make a statement. She was simply here to deposit her scholarship. The teller, Ms. Laura Donovan, greeted Amara with a professional smile that quickly faded when she saw the amount on the check. $10,000? Ms. Donovan's voice was suddenly loud enough to draw attention from nearby customers. This seems like quite a lot for a high school student. Amara, slightly taken aback, explained that it was her academic scholarship, but the suspicion in Ms. Donovan's eyes was palpable. "Are you sure this check is legitimate?" Ms. Donovan asked, her tone dripping with skepticism. "Where did you get it from?" Amara felt her cheeks flush, but she remained calm. "It's my scholarship. I can show you the award letter." Before she could hand over the letter, Ms. Donovan immediately pressed a button, and the branch manager, Victoria Hargrove, appeared. Ms. Hargrove was tall, with perfectly styled hair and designer glasses that added to her air of authority. She walked over to the counter, barely acknowledging Amara. She immediately snatched the check from Amara's hand without so much as a glance in her direction, her eyes fixated on the figure behind the counter. "This is the third one this week," Victoria muttered to Ms. Donovan, her voice thick with disdain. "A check this big, there's something off about it. We've had problems with fraudulent checks from people like you lately." Amara's heart sank. She could feel the eyes of the other customers on her. She could feel the weight of their judgment, the silent accusation in their gazes. "I assure you, this check is legitimate," Amara said, her voice steady despite the growing knot in her stomach. "I have all the necessary documentation to prove it." But Victoria's response was chilling. "It's not about what you have. It's about whether we believe it," she sneered. "I'll need to take all of this to verify. It could take a while." Amara's chest tightened. She hadn't planned on this. She was just here to deposit a simple check. But it was clear this wasn't going to be simple. Victoria motioned to the security guard, a towering man with a cold, intimidating presence. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "escort this girl to the back and make sure she doesn't go anywhere." As the security guard grabbed her arm, Amara's pulse quickened. "I just need to deposit my scholarship. Please, I haven't done anything wrong," she protested, but her words fell on deaf ears. The guard's grip tightened as he marched her away from the counter, leading her across the marble floor to a corner near the entrance. "Stay there," he barked. "Don't move." His eyes narrowed, and Amara knew that no one would come to her aid. She stood there isolated, the humiliation burning in her chest. She glanced around, seeing nothing but judgment from the other patrons, their whispers filling the air. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "Stand tall, no matter what. You have nothing to hide." But this felt different. This felt like an attack. She had never experienced anything like this before. The minutes dragged on, each second stretching into what felt like an eternity. Amara felt her anxiety rise as she glanced at the clock. How long had it been? 20 minutes? 30? She couldn't stand it any longer. "Please," she called out to the guard, her voice trembling. "I need to call my dad. He's expecting me soon. I don't have a phone, and you have all my documents. Please, just let me make one call." But the guard didn't even look at her. "No," he said firmly. "You'll wait." Amara felt a rising panic as she stood there, unable to do anything but watch the world move on without her. She glanced at her backpack again. Her phone, she had left it at school, sitting in her locker during study hall. She had no way of reaching her father now. And then it hit her. What if something had happened? What if her father needed to reach her and couldn't? What if he was already looking for her? She closed her eyes, trying to calm her racing thoughts. "Just stay calm," she whispered to herself. "You've been through worse." But everything around her was conspiring to make her feel small, insignificant. Hours passed. The clock ticked away, and Amara was still standing in that corner, forgotten by everyone except the security guard, who occasionally shot her a disapproving look. The bank seemed to grow quieter as the minutes passed. People came and went, but none of them stopped to intervene. She was just a kid, a 16-year-old girl caught in a web of racial prejudice and corporate greed. In the back office, Amara noticed Victoria speaking quietly to someone, a man in a crisp suit. He didn't belong here. His presence in the bank felt out of place, like he was hiding something. As she leaned closer, trying to see through the small gap in the office door, Amara's eyes widened as she recognized him. It was Harrison Wells, the CEO of Meridian Banking Group. Her father had mentioned him several times, an enemy of her family's business. Amara's breath caught in her throat. What was going on here? She had to know. She had to get the truth. The more she observed, the more she understood. There was a conspiracy happening right before her eyes, one that was meant to bring down her father's business, and Victoria Hargrove was at the center of it all. Amara's heart raced as she stood frozen in the corner, trying to process what she had just witnessed. Her mind swirled with questions. What was Harrison Wells doing here? Why was Victoria Hargrove, the bank manager, conspiring with him? Was this really about her scholarship check? Or was there something far deeper and more sinister unfolding before her eyes? She tried to steady her breath, forcing herself to focus. If she was going to get through this, she needed to remain calm and gather information. She reached into her backpack, pulling out her leather-bound notebook. Her father had always taught her to observe the world around her, to take notes and gather evidence before jumping to conclusions. And now, more than ever, she knew she had to do exactly that. As she scribbled down the names and the details of the conversation she had overheard between Victoria and Harrison, her mind flashed back to the way she had been treated when she first entered the bank. It hadn't just been about her check or her race, it was about the way they looked at her, the way they saw her as someone who didn't belong. It was a feeling she had experienced before, but never quite so acutely as she did here. What did Harrison Wells have to do with her father's business? Her father had never spoken positively about Wells. There was always tension when the name was brought up. The rivalry between their companies had been growing for years, but this was different. Amara had no idea how deep the corruption ran. She glanced up again and saw Victoria, still in her office with Wells. The door had opened slightly, and Amara could just make out the murmur of their voices. She strained her ears to catch their words, leaning forward ever so slightly. "Are you sure no one saw me come in?" Harrison asked, his voice laced with a sense of urgency. He quickly rose from his seat to check the blinds, making sure they were drawn properly. "Relax, Mr. Wells," Victoria replied, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "No one knows you're here. Everything is arranged exactly as we discussed." Amara's blood ran cold. She felt a chill run down her spine as she heard the name clearly for the first time. Harrison Wells, the man who had been trying to undermine her father for years. But why was he here, in this bank, speaking with Victoria about her family? Amara's mind was racing. The implications of their conversation were becoming clear. This wasn't just about her check. This was corporate sabotage, a deliberate attempt to destroy her father's bank. But it didn't stop there. It was also about stealing confidential information. The documents Victoria had just handed over, Montgomery documents, those were her father's files. Files that were meant to stay within his company. Her hand trembled as she wrote the details down in her notebook. She had to document everything, every word, every name, everything she could hear. "This is everything you asked for," Victoria said, sliding the manila folder across the desk. "Client lists, asset valuations, lending portfolios, everything you need to bring down Hancock Trust. We'll have everything in place by the end of the week." Amara's stomach churned as she read over her notes. This was worse than she had imagined. The documents Victoria was handing over were part of her father's bank's proprietary information trade secrets that would be used to ruin them. Amara could feel her hands shake as she wrote down everything she could remember. She knew this was the kind of evidence that could destroy Victoria, Harrison, and their entire operation. And the clients? Harrison's voice was low, almost too quiet for Amara to hear. They're already flagged, Victoria responded. I've identified the high-value clients that will be receptive to moving their accounts to Meridian. We'll get them to sign over their assets as soon as the takeover happens. I've even outlined the regulatory approvals and staffing changes needed to make the transition smooth. We're going to move quickly, before anyone realizes what's happening. Amara could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She had to stop them. She couldn't let them succeed in what they were planning. This wasn't just about her father's business anymore. It was about justice. About exposing the corruption and the betrayal that had been taking place right under her nose. But she wasn't sure how to act. She was trapped in a corner, with no way out. The security guard was still watching her closely, and there was no way she could leave without being noticed. She couldn't just confront Victoria and Harrison. Not yet. She needed more proof, more evidence to expose their scheme. It was at that moment that Amara realized something else, something that made her stomach drop even further. The documents in that folder weren't just about stealing information. They were about using that information to destroy everything her father had built. This was personal, and Amara was caught right in the middle of it. The door to Victoria's office creaked open slightly, and Amara could see Harrison standing up, ready to leave. She quickly closed her notebook, tucking it back into her backpack. The last thing she needed was to be caught with her notes. Harrison looked around the office one last time, checking for any signs of anyone noticing him. I'll make sure you're compensated well for this, he said to Victoria, his voice cold and calculating. Victoria smiled, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. You know I don't do this for the money, Mr. Wells. I do it for power. And with this, I'll have everything I need to take down Hancock Trust and make sure your takeover goes smoothly. Amara felt a wave of anger and helplessness wash over her. This wasn't just a business deal, it was a betrayal of everything her father had worked for. And now, she was the only one who knew the truth. As Harrison exited the office, Victoria stood by the door, her smile fading as she checked her watch. Everything's on track, she murmured to herself, her voice thick with satisfaction. She was so consumed by her own arrogance that she didn't even notice Amara's eyes fixed on her. Amara knew it was time to act. Amara stood frozen, barely able to breathe as she watched Victoria Hargrove walk away from her office, her steps measured and confident. The air in the bank was thick with tension, but to Amara, everything felt surreal. She could still hear the conversation echoing in her mind. The plans, the betrayal, and the dark undercurrent of corruption that threatened to tear apart everything her father had worked so hard to build. She had just witnessed something no one was supposed to see, something that, if exposed, would bring down not only Victoria and Harrison Wells, but the entire corporate structure of Meridian Banking Group. They were plotting to steal sensitive documents, destroy Hancock Trust Bank, and transfer clients' funds under false pretenses. And now, she held all the proof in her hands. But Amara knew she couldn't act immediately. The security guard was still watching her, and Victoria had clearly noticed the subtle shifts in Amara's behavior. If she made one wrong move, it could all fall apart. She had to be smart, calculated. She had to find a way out of this corner and get her evidence to her father before it was too late. As she continued to stand in her designated corner, her legs beginning to ache from the hours of forced immobility, Amara's mind raced. She had to think of a plan, and fast. Her father had taught her to always think one step ahead, to never let the enemy see your next move. But now she was fighting an enemy she had never expected to face. Not just a corrupt manager and a ruthless CEO, but an entire system that thrived on betrayal and greed. She looked over at the desk where Melody Pham, the young Asian-American teller, had been nervously glancing at her for hours. Melody had clearly noticed what was happening, but had remained silent, torn between fear and sympathy. Amara knew she couldn't expect help from the other customers. No one here would risk their position to stand up for her. But maybe Melody, someone who worked in the same place, could be the key. Amara didn't have much time, but she made the decision. She caught Melody's eye across the room and gave her a subtle nod. Melody, hesitating for a moment, looked back at her with uncertainty. But after a long pause, she stood up from her post and slowly made her way toward the restroom. Amara's heart raced. This was her moment. She was careful not to draw attention to herself as she followed Melody from a distance, keeping her eyes on the security guard, who was still lazily scanning the bank floor. When Melody disappeared into the restroom, Amara quickly moved toward the counter, pretending to glance at the brochures on display. She moved quietly, and by the time she reached the restroom door, she was standing just outside it. She waited. A few moments later, Melody emerged from the restroom, glancing nervously around. When she saw Amara, she walked over, her face filled with apprehension. "What's going on, Amara?" Melody whispered, her voice low. "I saw everything, what Victoria and Harrison were talking about. I know it's bad, but what are you going to do about it?" Amara took a deep breath, glancing at the security guard to ensure he hadn't noticed them. "I have everything I need to stop them, but I can't do it alone. I need your help. Do you know how to get this evidence to my father without anyone noticing? I can't trust anyone here. Victoria has all my documents, and I can't leave until I get them back." Melody hesitated for a moment, looking torn. But then her expression hardened, her voice soft but determined. "I can help you. I've been working here for 2 years. I see things every day. Things I'm not proud of. I don't want to be part of this anymore. I'll get your father's people involved. But you need to get your documents back first. That's our first step." Amara nodded. Her heart was pounding with the realization that, for the first time in hours, she wasn't alone in this fight. Melody might not have the power to take down the entire operation, but together, they had a shot. They could expose what was really going on. With a plan forming in her mind, Amara quickly returned to her corner, pretending to be lost in thought. She knew she couldn't act too quickly. The opportunity had to be perfect. She watched as Victoria, oblivious to the growing rebellion under her nose, continued to interact with the clients, her smile now far too wide and fake. The clock on the wall ticked away, but Amara felt every second stretch on forever. She was ready. The next part of the plan was simple. She needed to get her documents back. After a few more minutes of careful observation, Amara noticed something. Victoria had taken a phone call. The office door, which had once been partially open, was now wide enough to reveal that Victoria had left her desk and was speaking into her phone. It was the perfect opportunity. Melody was already standing by the front desk, her eyes darting nervously between the manager's office and Amara's corner. Amara gave her a subtle nod, now or never. Melody quickly crossed the room, moving with purpose. The security guard barely noticed her. She made her way to the back office area and disappeared into the hallway that led to the vaults. Amara held her breath, watching as Melody passed out of sight. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling longer than the last. Amara knew that this would be her one chance to grab her documents and escape without further incident. She could see the telltale sign that Melody was approaching, the way the guard had turned to glance back at the vault doors. Melody was coming through the side entrance, carrying a folder in her hands. Amara's heart soared. She saw her opening. She waited for Melody to pass by her, before standing and walking quickly but quietly toward the restroom. Her plan was in motion, and it was all happening so fast. Her hands were shaking, but she knew there was no turning back now. The sound of the restroom door closing behind her was the only thing that filled the space. She opened the folder, and there they were, her father's confidential documents. Amara's eyes went wide with relief. She was one step closer, but the hardest part was still ahead. They couldn't leave. Not yet. Amara stood silently in the restroom, clutching the folder that held the confidential documents she had fought so hard to get back. Her fingers trembled as she flipped through the pages, taking in the sheer weight of what she had just uncovered. These were not just any documents. These were the keys to exposing the conspiracy to steal her father's company, Hancock Trust Bank. Every page revealed a layer of betrayal that threatened to tear apart everything her father had worked for. The feeling of injustice washed over her like a tidal wave. She had been humiliated, isolated, and mistreated in this very bank, and now, armed with the truth, she had the power to make it all right. But as she stood there, hidden away in the restroom, the reality of what she was about to do began to settle in. This wasn't just about her father's business anymore. This was about standing up for what was right, about exposing the corruption and greed that had been festering in the heart of Hancock Trust Bank for far too long. She had to act fast. Her window of opportunity was closing. Victoria Hargrove was still distracted, and the security guard was starting to take notice of her absence. Amara knew that if she didn't get out of the bank soon, things would only escalate. She took one final glance at the documents in her hand, feeling the weight of the truth press down on her shoulders. This was the moment that could change everything. With her heart pounding in her chest, Amara carefully placed the folder into her backpack and made her way toward the door. She paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. She couldn't afford to get caught. She couldn't afford to let Victoria or the security guard realize what had just happened. She stepped out of the restroom, keeping her movements as casual as possible. The bank's busy atmosphere seemed to have returned to normal, with customers chatting quietly and the tellers working as if nothing had changed. But to Amara, everything had changed. She was no longer the quiet, unsuspecting girl she had been when she first walked in. She was now a force for justice, armed with the truth that could bring this entire operation to its knees. Amara moved swiftly but carefully, making her way to the front exit. She could feel the eyes of the customers on her, but this time it didn't matter. She wasn't worried about their judgment anymore. She had one mission now: to get out of the bank and into safety, where she could contact her father and ensure that the conspiracy was exposed. As she approached the door, she noticed the security guard standing by the entrance. His eyes locked onto her, and for a moment, Amara's heart skipped a beat. But she didn't stop. She kept her pace steady, walking with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Just as she reached the door, the security guard stepped forward. "Hold it right there," he barked, his hand reaching out to stop her. Amara's stomach lurched, but she didn't falter. She turned to face him, her eyes narrowing. "I'm leaving. You don't have any reason to stop me," she said, her voice calm but firm. The guard's expression shifted, but he didn't move. "You've been causing trouble all day. We can't just let you walk out of here without explanation." Amara's mind raced. She had to act quickly. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice laced with feigned confusion. "I've done nothing wrong. I came to deposit a check, and now I'm leaving." The guard hesitated, but just as he was about to respond, the sound of footsteps interrupted him. Melody appeared from behind the counter, her face flushed with urgency. "Everything okay here?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. The guard looked at her, his expression hardening. "This girl is causing a scene. She's not leaving without an explanation." Melody's eyes flicked from the guard to Amara, and without missing a beat, she spoke up. "I can vouch for her. She's a customer here, and she's done nothing wrong. Let her go." Amara felt a surge of gratitude toward Melody. She had no idea if the young teller was just covering for her, or if she truly believed in her. But in that moment, Melody's support meant everything. The security guard looked back and forth between the two women, his resolve wavering. Finally, with a frustrated sigh, he stepped aside. "Fine, but don't come back here causing trouble again," he muttered, as Amara walked past him. Her heart raced as she stepped outside the bank into the bright sunlight. She had done it. She had made it out. But the fight was far from over. Amara quickly walked down the street, her mind racing. She needed to get to her father, but first she needed to ensure that the evidence was safely in her hands. The documents could destroy everything: Victoria Hargrove's career, Harrison Wells' plans, and most importantly, the foundation of her father's empire. She pulled out her phone, dialed her father's number, and waited. The ringing tones seemed to echo in her mind, each second feeling like an eternity. Finally, the call was answered. "Amara?" Her father's voice crackled through the phone, filled with surprise. "Is everything okay?" "Dad, listen to me carefully," Amara said, her voice urgent. "I have proof that someone is trying to take down Hancock Trust Bank. Victoria Hargrove, the manager, and Harrison Wells from Meridian Banking. They've been planning a corporate takeover using stolen information. I have the documents, and they're all in my backpack right now. But we need to act fast before they can destroy everything you've built." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, her father's voice broke through. "Amara, I'm proud of you. But this isn't something we can handle alone. I'm calling in my team. Get somewhere safe, and don't let anyone see what you have. We'll take care of the rest." Amara nodded, her pulse still racing. "I'm on my way home now. I'll be there in 15 minutes. As she hung up, she felt a sense of relief wash over her. The pieces were in place. The truth would be revealed, and real justice, was coming for Victoria and Harrison. Amara made her way home, her thoughts racing as the world around her passed by in a blur. The sun was starting to dip beneath the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet streets of Oakage. But to Amara, the world felt anything but peaceful. She had just uncovered a plot that could tear apart everything her father had worked for. The conspiracy to steal Hancock Trust Bank was more than just a corporate rivalry. It was a calculated act of betrayal that reached all the way into her family's business. As she walked through the front door of the Simmons household, the weight of the documents in her backpack seemed heavier than ever. Her father, Charles Simmons, was already waiting in the living room, his calm demeanor betraying none of the concern that Amara felt inside. He was always composed, a pillar of strength, but today, Amara could see the subtle tension in his eyes. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to remain composed. "I have the documents. I have everything we need to stop them." Charles stood up from his chair, his expression immediately hardening. "Where is it? Let me see." Amara pulled the manila folder from her backpack and handed it to him. As he flipped through the pages, the color drained from his face. He didn't need to read much to understand what was going on. The confidential files were filled with damning evidence-detailed reports, client lists, proprietary financial strategies, everything Victoria and Harrison had been plotting to steal and use against Hancock Trust. It was all right there. Charles took a deep breath, his hands steady as he set the folder down on the coffee table. "This is worse than I thought," he murmured. "I knew Wells and Hargrove were ruthless, but this is next level." Amara sat down beside him, the weight of the situation still sinking in. "What do we do now? How do we stop them?" Charles looked at her, his eyes filled with pride and something else, an unspoken acknowledgement of how far she'd come. "We fight back. We expose them. But we need to be careful. They've been planning this for months, maybe longer. If we go public with this without the right support, they'll bury us." Amara nodded, the realization settling over her. This wasn't going to be easy. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She had the truth, and she wasn't going to let it be buried. The next few hours were a whirlwind. Charles contacted his most trusted allies in the financial world, including several journalists and legal experts who could help expose the plot without putting their family in immediate danger. Amara stayed by his side, offering everything she had gathered, including the names of key people involved and the specifics of the planned corporate takeover. As midnight approached, Charles stood up from his desk, wiping a hand across his face. "It's done. The word's out." Amara felt a flicker of hope. "What happens now?" Charles smiled, but it was a grim smile, one that spoke of years of experience in the cutthroat world of business. "Now, we watch. We make sure that Victoria and Wells can't cover their tracks. And we prepare for the fallout. But we'll expose them publicly, with everything we have." The next day, the first ripple of the storm began. A major news outlet ran a breaking story about the confidential documents Amara had uncovered, detailing the corporate sabotage and betrayal orchestrated by Victoria Hargrove and Harrison Wells. The headline was explosive. "Corporate Conspiracy Uncovered. Top Banker and CEO Plot to Take Down Rival Bank Using Stolen Assets." The article went on to detail everything Amara had witnessed, the shady dealings, the forged documents, and the secret meetings between Victoria and Wells. As the story made its rounds, other outlets picked it up, and soon, the public was demanding answers. Victoria Hargrove was immediately placed on administrative leave, pending an investigation. Harrison Wells faced public scrutiny, and his company's stock took a hit. The pressure was mounting, but the real impact was felt at Hancock Trust Bank. Charles Simmons, who had once been a relatively low-key player in the banking world, found himself thrust into the spotlight. His name, tied to the exposé, became synonymous with integrity and truth. Investors rallied behind him, and the public began to see Hancock Trust not as a rival, but as a symbol of resilience in the face of corporate corruption. As the days passed, Victoria and Harrison's world began to unravel. Legal investigations were launched, and both of them faced charges related to fraud, conspiracy, and corporate espionage. Their carefully crafted reputations, built on years of manipulation and deceit, collapsed in front of the world. It wasn't just their careers that were at risk, it was their freedom. For Amara, the aftermath of the exposé was bittersweet. Her actions had brought justice, but the scars of the experience were still fresh. She had been humiliated, manipulated, and forced to stand alone in the face of powerful enemies. But through it all, she had held on to one thing: the truth. That evening, as Amara sat at the dinner table with her father, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known for days. The battle wasn't over, but they had won the first fight. Her father raised a glass. "To truth," he said, his voice steady and proud. "It may not always be easy, but it's always worth fighting for." Amara smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "To truth," she echoed. As they clinked glasses, she knew that the road ahead would be long. But with the power of truth on their side, they would face whatever came next with the same determination and courage that had carried them through the darkest moments of the battle. And as for Victoria Hargrove and Harrison Wells, they would face the consequences of their actions, and Amara would make sure that justice was served.